In your words, what is good quality practice, elite quality management system?
Covering everything that goes into your product from early design through final release to the end user. So ensuring that the first product you make is as good as the millionth and 10 millionth product that you make and sell.
I feel like product development, everybody likes it, everybody talks about it, it's super fun. And then quality is somehow treated like ex parte to the product development fun that's going on over there.
They're always the ones like, yeah, we know we need quality. We know we need to start as soon as possible. We know we likely need experts to support us as well. It's the ones that have done this before, gotten multiple products through the FDA, through successful exits, that know the value of doing this stuff from the start.
But when you're going on into that quality exercise and you're doing failure mode evaluations and analysis, right? You're talking about how could this thing absolutely fail? And you have to rack your brain and find a million ways it could fail, right? So it almost kind of takes, to go through the process really effectively, takes a little bit of an ego death and putting yourself objectively in the patient's shoes, in the surgeon's shoes. And I think that is so healthy for founders to do.
Having that brainstorm session around those.
Hey everyone, Spencer Jones here, founder at Medtech. Thank you for joining today's episode of the Medtech Innovation Podcast. I am very lucky today to have with us Kyle Rose. Kyle is the CEO at Rook Quality Systems. Kyle served as a quality and regulatory consultant advising multiple Fortune 500 companies around the world, medical devices, software, diagnostics on all things quality and regulatory. He's also very generous with his time. He's been a mentor to multiple incubators, hospital systems, accelerators, universities, and we are lucky enough to have Rook as a founding sponsor, founding partner for Medtech. So many thanks to that. But Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Spencer. Excited that we got this recording going finally. I know we've had some hiccups, some hurricanes, all that stuff. So yeah, definitely excited to get this going. Tell you a little bit about Rook, how we work with startup, and why we think quality is so important.
No, let's dive into that a little bit. I want to, let the audience know, who is Rook? What do you guys do? Kind of what do you specialize in? What are your superpowers?
Yeah, definitely. So Rook is a consulting company I started 2012, so going on 12 years now. I had worked in industry, both big and small companies, and just saw from my personal experience how quality systems is a huge part of these companies, these bigger medtech companies, med device companies, but it's often something that's ignored at the early stage and startup phase, and it's also something that can be very inefficient and can be very complex and very long documents and gets the bad rap of being boring and not fun. But kind of my focus was, how do we make this more efficient? It is pretty critical to the product and the quality. So it's important that we kind of improve this process, but then can also train it to early stage companies, developers, physicians that are coming up with their own product, that type of scope. So that's how I started Rook kind of 12 years ago by myself as a part-time role, and have now grown it where we have over 35 consultants. We've got a branch in the US, a branch in Taiwan, a branch in Europe, and we help over 150 companies per month kind of manage and maintain their quality and regulatory scope.
Wow. Didn't know that you guys had the reach like that you did. I know you guys have been growing like wildfire, but that's awesome. So for those people that may not have just a super intimate knowledge and understanding of what quality and good quality management is, in your words, what is good quality practice, elite quality management system type work? What does all that mean to you?
Yeah, so it really means kind of covering everything that goes into your product from early design through, final release to the end user. So make sure that you have intense design controls and risk analysis when you're developing your device and you've tested it properly to know it's safe, using quality throughout the manufacturing and quality control process. So ensuring that the first product you make is as good as the millionth and 10 millionth product that you make and sell, which is a lot harder than people think it is. And then the ongoing process of handling customer feedback and using that information to improve your product and make sure you are making the most safe and effective product you can for the people using it, the end users, the patients, anybody like that. So, and all this information ties back to the quality system, and that everything you're doing for your medical device has to be documented, has to be recorded. It's not documented, it didn't happen, really. So the quality system is the foundation to showing that you have a safe and effective device, and then you have the receipts to back that up, right? To show that we did everything we're supposed to do when we made this product, when we developed this product. So that's key. I think this should apply to everything, not just med device, a consumer product, food, everything, right? When you start to dive into how this works and how much it improves your company and your process and your product, I really think it is a valuable process for any type of company. But, lucky for med device, it is required. So it's not an optional thing. We have to do this because the FDA and international requirements make us. So
yeah, well, no, to that point, people don't think about quality all the time until it hits them in the face and they have a bad experience with the quality of a product, right? I'll use Apple as one. I feel like every time you get an Apple product, you know exactly the level of quality. It's outstanding. They're all exactly the same. So I think when people are like, one way to think of quality is like when you unbox that Apple product, you know exactly what you're going to get. The first one they ship versus the 5 millionth they ship are all great. I think the other analogy, and I know you and I have talked about this before, that we like to use is like the restaurant analogy, right? Like a lot of people, when they have a bad experience at a restaurant, that's typically a quality issue, right? And you've got the recipes, right? That's kind of your documentation. Your ingredients check, right? That's your input control. Your ingredient vendors, right? Where'd you buy your produce? Where'd you get the meat? Those are your approved suppliers. But it really does kind of share the same thing. But yeah, just expand on that a little bit if you would.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think I've used that a lot before. It's like if you've ever tried to make the same meal 2 or 3 days in a row, you start to see some variables that come in. You're like, oh, this happened a little fast, or I wasn't watching the clock, and this changed. And when we go into these early stage labs or these academic settings that are developing a product, or even in the R&D phase, we're like, hey, how do you know that everybody's doing everything the same way, right? It starts to be like, oh, well, this shift does it a little different, and they use this notebook, and then we're doing a little bit over here because we think this is faster. Really, like having a set procedure, set process, set work instruction really helps. Like, oh, well, now we're much more consistent when we do everything the same. So just diving and taking that approach into the material process, the temperature, everything that goes into making a meal or running a restaurant aligns as well with your medical device product, and how the manufacturing process, whether that's very automated or very manual, you can have a lot of variables going back to your suppliers, everything else. If you're getting a different material this one day, it's going to affect your product when it comes out. So that kind of quality process, especially when you get into manufacturing, became a much bigger headache than you think it would be.
Well, and it's like, this isn't food we're talking about here where someone may just have like a bad taste in their mouth. Like these are like life-saving devices. So every little piece of the entire process, like, people's lives literally depend on it. But I did like what you said earlier as well, and totally agree with it about quality getting a bad rap as like, whatever, not as fun or this, that, or the other. Because I feel like product development, everybody likes it, everybody talks about it, it's super fun. And then quality is somehow treated like ex parte to the product development fun that's going on over there, right? But like I truly see that there is a direct link, and frankly that quality is just such a critical part of the design and development process, not even in the sense that it is a documentation and kind of an output, if you will, of a lot of the design and development work, but like if you do good quality management throughout your design and development process, I truly believe you're going to come out on the end with a much, much better product. I don't know if you agree, disagree.
I definitely agree. Yeah, and I think where some of the bad rap comes is that people think it's either slowing down development or they're making you do things that aren't necessary, but I think it's kind of the opposite. One of my personal pet peeves is having to go back and redo work or redo something that I thought I did right the first time, right? And having a quality mindset or quality framework really prevents that, right? If you start from, beginning design and development ideation phase, it's like, what are we trying to build? What tests is it going to have to go through? What are the requirements for this product as far as materials, how it's going to be used or interact with the body? All these things interact with key design decisions for your product. So you want to make sure that you're addressing these things as you're going through development, so you don't get down the road and say, oh, well, we forgot we have to have this type of material, or we have to test it for 2 years to make sure it's safe, right? And then you've wasted who knows how much time, how much money with that development because you didn't take the proper step from the start to identify your quality path, your regulatory path, and look at these things. Also, risk is hand in hand as well, right? What risk are we posing by this new type of device, this new type of feature? All those things I think work very beneficial to sort that out from the start. Saves you time, saves you money down the long road, but you also have that process of going through and thinking about how your product will look, how to work in the end, and you can use that as you're going through development.
Yeah, no, 100%. One of the big benefits to me, I think, when you're really leaning into quality and trying to do it the right way, there's a smaller number of like, how did we miss that moments kind of deal? Because when you're really thinking about your failure modes and going through user failure modes and design failure modes and really exhaustively thinking about each component, subcomponent, assembly, and the user needs and the user inputs and the design, inputs, design outputs for all of those things, it is much harder to miss, like, why did we not radius that edge? Or why didn't we think about the surface finish here? Or why did we not use, an MRI compatible material for this thing? But when you're just kind of skating through it, it's a lot easier to miss those things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's always the idea that we want to move as fast as possible, but then we can kind of hit a point where like, oh, we do need to dive in and know all these things. They can't just be, we'll figure it out as we go. These minor issues, if you don't know specifications for all these things, when you get to that manufacturing phase or you're transferring this to somebody else to make high volumes of these little things that are unknowns are going to become stack issues, tolerance issues that lead to potential failures or yield quality when you're actually making product. All of these things start to add up. So it's really like you have to know everything about your product, everything about the manufacturing process. And if you really dive in from the start, it's much easier to move forward faster knowing this information.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's, when we meet people that have gone through this before, they're always the ones like, yeah, we know we need quality. We know we need to start as soon as possible. We know we likely need experts to support us as well, right? It's the ones that have done this before, gotten multiple products through the FDA, through successful exits that know the value of doing this stuff from the start. And that's what we're trying to preach and educate the rest of the community on, right? This is a new thing if you're not specifically working in med device and familiar, but within the med device community, everybody that's experienced knows how critical it is to have the quality foundation and start it as soon as you can.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the role it plays in exits and acquisition later, but something that if you've been in the industry long enough, like you'll just hear Medtronic's name come up as a company that has fantastic quality. And when you're, if you're thinking about being a hospital system and this company got a recall and that company got a recall, but then you've got a large company you're trying to partner with and give them multiple contracts or establish pricing agreements and their quality is top tier, right? That goes a long way, right? It's really important. When we've been kind of talking about the timing a little bit, you said when you talk to early stage companies, they know that they need to engage with quality and they know they need to do it early. So I would just ask you this question, kind of what's your general philosophy on when to engage with a quality and regulatory consulting firm? And those engagements can look different at different points, kind of starting in tranches, like open-ended question there. What do you recommend for early stage companies?
Yeah, I get this question a lot and I kind of have two answers, right? So the first is that, we have had really great success with very, very early stage academic research to implementing high level quality. And this might not lead to your final device. And a lot of times we're implementing this just to say, you need to pass this next test or next step to even know if your product is going to make it to the next stage, right? So putting in this framework early on to say, this is our killer experiment. We need to get to this before we can move forward and, even start to think about raising money or forming a company. So we've had a lot of success with that. We helped the whole RADx program get all these COVID diagnostics to market as quickly as possible during the pandemic. And a lot of those were similar, very early stage academic, never been a company, never done med device. And it's really like, and we knew a ton of them were going to fail, but like, how do we figure out as fast as possible, does this technology work? Is it going to work enough to get to medical device, right? And with diagnostics, it's pretty easy to identify. With companies that have an established product, they're still in design development and they've raised some money, we typically say kind of the version before you're going to start testing is as late as you want to wait to do quality and design, right? Because typically you have a few different versions of your prototypes, you're going through these things. You're going to have to get to a point where you have one that you're going to build that's going to go through your internal bench testing, your external biocompatibility or 60601 or whatever that might be. So that version before you build is kind of the latest I would wait to start doing this deep dive into quality. There are some advantages of doing it a little earlier, but there's also, we've seen companies where they keep iterating and they're documenting too much and it is potentially slowing them down, right? So we don't want to be documenting too much if you still haven't gotten the product to work, right? So there is, especially, in the space we're in, we're working with a lot of new technology, novel ideas that have never been done before, which is cool, but it also means it's not an easy solution, right? If somebody else is trying to figure out, it's not going to be, here's your first answer and it works. But so that's kind of the latest you can wait is that version before you're going to start testing to really dive in on quality, design, and risk and make sure you have that foundation for the next step.
Yeah, so maybe like when you've got your concept, feasibility, design, and you're kind of really starting to prototype some sub-assemblies, but definitely prior to, hey, we've got a full, concept, feasibility prototype that we're making before that point is what I'm hearing, right? There was a bunch of things in there that were really good. I think just because you haven't engaged a regulatory consulting group yet, there are still some things from a quality perspective you can be doing and should be doing. And it may not even feel like quality at the time. And user needs is the first one that popped into my head, right? Just documenting those user needs. But whenever you are starting to engage with a client and they come to you with X, Y, and Z, right? What are the things that you just like absolutely love for your early stage clients to kind of engage you guys with on that really early stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's aligned with what you said is having the process, and it doesn't have to be in any formal type of documentation. You can have a Google Doc you're using to just document, but they have sat and thought about like, these are our user needs. This is who we're trying to target. This is how our product's going to be used. This is some high level specifications of what we need it to do, how fast we need a result, or what the size and form factor needs to be, things like that. And then I also like to have like a high level, like what could go wrong, just from the worst case harm final risk analysis thing, like what could go wrong with this, just so we have that framework in place as well. And like I said, this doesn't have to be in a formal template. We have templates, there's all these other things you can do to make it more formal, but just having the process of brainstorming with the key people on your team to go through this thought exercise, say who needs to use it, how's it going to be used, what are the specs we have to meet, and then what could go wrong. I feel like that gets you very far if we have that information. We can dive into all the regulatory stuff, classification, product code, all that stuff. That can even change, right, with different strategies on if you want to go de novo first or predicate off yourself, all those types of things. But having that brainstorm session around those key, what does it do, what could go wrong, I think is really important. And that's what we like to start with too. If there's kind of early in the process, sometimes it can be harder to explain this certain types of devices, but I think that's a good framework that any company can do internally and will get you even into the next step.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'll beat this drum again till the cows come home, but like customer discovery is so good for a million things, right? Validating the problem you're solving, understanding the pain points it needs to solve and the, requirements that it needs from like a commercial perspective, but like equally as valuable, you can start to suss out those user needs whenever you're going through that customer discovery process. And, we call that discovery driven development. And it, if you continue to lean in to discovery driven development, you are going to have those user needs. And if you document your customer discovery, which is almost a quality element too, right? Documenting your customer discovery and making sure you're getting quantitative and qualitative feedback, that's all going to feed into it. But yeah, to your point, you can start too early, right? If you're like, hey, we're going to go from concept to Rev A to Rev B to Rev C, and you're on your second design review meeting and you're already like, revving up prints to Rev F, you know what I mean? That's probably too early and you're wasting some time and money there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've seen that happen before, right? And it, hopefully they're getting information and they're learning through each phase. The design history file, you want to document the design history of your product, but similar, we don't, especially with time and money being so critical, we don't want to go overkill if you still know you're going to have to make 4 major design changes before you're even ready for this testing, right? So it's make sure the product's working, you've got something you can then go towards testing before you really dive too deep on the documentation. Obviously, there's some types of products that are much riskier or need a lot more documentation, so it might be good to start earlier. Software devices, you have to do the kind of whole history of your revisions and bug fixes and present that FDA, but for a lot of products, if you do have a long development, and we've seen startups that are 10 plus years in and still haven't submitted, right? So does it make sense to be documenting intensely for 10 years and still not be ready for FDA submission?
Yeah, for sure. So talking about the downside of not doing it well, right? Or getting in trouble, causing yourself headaches. Do you have any anonymized, but candid stories where you saw people have headaches from starting it too late or headaches from not doing it quite the way that you would have recommended?
I could probably do a few podcasts just on this topic, but yeah, I mean, one of the early stage companies I started working with, right kind of when Rook had just started up, was a high profile startup, was winning awards and all these pitch events and things like that, but, had really neglected the core focus of the quality to make sure the product itself worked, it was being tested properly and developed within a quality mindset, more focused on marketing and pitches and things like that, and the quality never got to the point that it needed to be, and unfortunately that that company didn't succeed. Similar stage, we see companies that are kind of in the post-market phase where they've already gotten the 510K, but they kind of either had some templates or had an eQMS, but never really dove into living in the quality system for, the whole life of the company, life of the product. And then, the FDA calls it, hey, we'll be there on Wednesday. And they're like, oh no, we're not ready, right? So there's the ones that, call us and say, hey, we even had companies weren't even officially clients yet, right? And they're like, all right, can you guys dive in and help us over the weekend and get ready for this FDA audit? And we do, we help as much as we can, but that's another big one, right? Where they think because they have a 510K that the quality isn't as important, but that's really when it really starts, right? Is once you get your clearance and you're selling this product, quality should be one of your main focus going forward, right? To make sure you have it all documented, you have all of the ongoing testing and any design changes, all of that information is going to be audited, right? And if you don't do that properly, you have warning letters, you can have more severe actions. All this information is public as well. And yeah, lots of horror stories, nightmare situations, all that.
For sure. I think too, you were talking earlier about making it the same the first time and the 1,000th time and the 10,000th time. But like having a really strong quality foundation almost kind of, it definitely to me assists the relationship that you have with your contract manufacturer and any other suppliers, right? Because it sets the stage, it outlines the expectations, how to handle when things are out of spec or scrap or this, that, and the other. Like I've said before, it's a marriage with your contract manufacturing partners. And so if you have a commitment to quality, they have a commitment to quality that's matching or exceeding that, then you're just going to have a lot better of a time together. And even when things don't go perfect, or maybe there's something that goes wrong, or there's more scrap, or you're seeing some product malfunctions, right? You have to do a CAPA. If you've got good quality foundation, like that process that you'll have to go to, as painful as it may be with your contract manufacturer, is going to be a lot more smoother. Can you talk about some times where you've seen that where companies got to lean on their quality with the contract manufacturers in some hairy situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that touches on what I was saying earlier about you really have to know your product inside and out. And the best time to figure that out is during this development phase, right? Because whether you're doing manufacturing or you're outsourcing it, at some point you're going to have to transfer all of your knowledge that you've learned through development to somebody else and hope they read all that and have the same experience you do, even though they're using different equipment, different materials, different suppliers on their side. There's a lot of things that can go wrong kind of in that manufacturing phase. We always tell companies that you need to go be on site during that first manufacturing run, right? We do supplier audits, we do audits of contract manufacturers all the time, but if they're not making your product, you're just reviewing their best case that they made for somebody else, and even then they probably can't show you that much information, right? So you need to be on site when they're making your product, walking through how they move materials, how they store materials. That is really, and we've seen that go poorly with a lot of types of product and super customized things, even like some of the 3D printed or custom medical devices. You really need to be hands-on throughout these processes to make sure it's being done properly. But if you are there, then it's much easier to identify and catch, especially if you are an expert in your product. So I think that's the thing. We also help companies bring in manufacturing, and it's really critical to make sure you know your process, you know every little step and what could go wrong to ensure you have quality. And then, like you said, if there is an issue, it's much easier to figure out what the root cause is when you have a better understanding of how everything works.
Yeah, no, 100%. The other one thing that I think is a huge benefit of going through the exercise with your quality management system and kind of practicing elite quality is just the mindset and kind of the framework that it gets you in, as especially as a founder, but also as an early employee, because so much of what you're doing is you're selling the dream, you're selling the story, it's revenue projections, it's exits for blank, right? But when you're going on into that quality exercise and you're doing failure mode evaluations and analysis, right? You're talking about how could this thing absolutely fail? What's a worst case scenario for our business based on this product failing in what way? And you have to rack your brain and find a million ways it could fail, right? And then attach risk scores to those. So it almost kind of takes, to go through the process really effectively, takes a little bit of an ego death and putting yourself objectively in the patient's shoes, in the surgeon's shoes. And I think that is so healthy for founders to do, and something that's kind of underappreciated about quality.
I love that phase of development, risk analysis, FMEAs, all that. I think it's super beneficial, like I said, for the product, for your organization, for the process. It is going to help you solve problems before they happen, honestly. Like, you will think of things and say, oh, well, if we don't check this at incoming inspection, it could be confused for something else. So we want to make sure that we know exactly where this goes and what this product's used for. All that stuff is going to save you time and money down the road. So I definitely think that's super valuable.
Yeah, I've got a quick aside, like quality story. It has nothing to do with me or any of the companies I've worked with, but one of my buddies, he was having like an ACL repair, right? Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of those probably a year. and they were, tapping, going in with a drill to do kind of like a screw tap, and the drill bit broke off basically in his leg, like in his femur, I think. And the surgeon was like, I've never had this happen before. I've never heard of this happening before. They get the rep's on the phone with corporate. They're literally talking to the engineers from the company, and they're like trying to figure out what they're going to do. They're like, okay, so we have two options. We could just leave it in there, or we can break your femur and pull it out through the other side, and you'll be in a wheelchair for like 6 months. Yeah. So he was like, all right, just leave it in there. It wasn't huge, right? I mean, it was, but even that, right? Like they may have had like a, what if something breaks off? But like, as the way he described it, he was like, they're like, we have not prepared for this. But it just goes to show you that like, it is so important, because especially if you are successful and you're getting not hundreds, but thousands and tens of thousands of your products out there, that like, oh, it's 1 in a million, or like 1 in 10,000. Like all that starts to become much more real, right? Whenever you're really scaling your business.
Yeah, it is crazy. We've worked with some smart drills before and some drill bits. Definitely.
I've got a question, and I've seen this kind of be handled different ways at different companies, and I don't even know that I have like a super well formed opinion on this. But like a lot of the times, you've got your founder, usually clinical or engineering, right? They've experienced the problem, or they technically developed a solution, and then you kind of start to build out your team, and you've got 2 and 3 and 4. Let's just say 3 or 4 employees, and it's usually some combination of clinical, commercial, and engineering, right? But typically you're not hiring anyone for quality for like some time, right? You engage with a quality and regulatory consulting firm, and then they act as an extension of your team. In those situations, or maybe what have you seen work well? In my mind, there's almost 2 models where you have everyone on the team kind of really commit to quality and commit to like, passing the baton, almost sharing equally. Maybe the engineering person, of course, is going to share it a little bit more, versus basically saying like, hey, of the 3 early employees, engineer, you are going to own it, you're going to manage it, you're going to liaise with the quality and regulatory group that we've chosen, and then kind of we are just going to pop in on meetings here and there. I gave 2 options. It's not binary. Just want to see like what you'd recommend, right, for early stage companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen the most success with the companies that have it as a shared, we're all bought into quality. They might not be sharing the same amount of documentation or quality upkeep, but just, having them understand that this is key, especially from kind of the CEO decision maker side, that we are going to have resources and budget allocated to quality. I think that's key, because if it gets push the engineer, then it's also in the, oh, well, now this quality stuff's slowing us down, so we need to move this product faster, and that's on the engineer as well, but he has to also make sure he's doing all the quality, right? So I think having it shared and similar, like I said, when we go through and get new clients that are startups that have done this before, they know it's a whole company-wide thing, right? They know the CEO is pushing this, and the board is pushing this as well, right? The board's participating in some management review meetings, things like that, right? So they all know, the investors and the CEO, that this is critical to what they're doing, and it's going to be critical the whole time, right? So I think that's the case. We have obviously seen the scenario where the engineer leads it and they've got quality and they can juggle all this stuff. I think the risk, and why Rook comes in a lot and has been so successful, is we don't want to slow down development or engineering, right? We want to keep them moving as fast as they can. So if we can supplement them on the quality side, say, hey, hardware device, software device, you keep focused on developing as fast as you can because you have these milestones outlined by your raise and your funds. Let us handle the quality side and not slow you down. Obviously, they're still participating, but it's allowing them to focus on kind of why they started the company, right? It's rare they started the company to do quality, more on the engineering development side.
Yeah, I agree. I think like the whole team approach, you're going to have better quality, just period, better quality practices as a whole. And I think that's the winning formula for sure. So there's paper-based systems, right? And then there's eQMS-based systems. I've always thought they're both great and they're both, good for specific situations. And I think obviously, technology systems are just getting better and better, right? Especially with the advent of AI. But wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that, kind of how you guys evolved from years past into now with eQMSs and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, eQMS has been great for us. So our team has always been remote. So our ability to use eQMS and allow us to work from our home office or whatever with any of our clients around the world in their same eQMS and sign documents and approve, design review, all those things is great. I think it's very efficient. I think the issue we see sometimes is people assume that buying an eQMS means they're compliant or that there's much less work to be done. I think that is definitely something that should be avoided. The eQMS is not going to do everything for you. You still need somebody in there running the eQMS, doing the day-to-day doc control, training, design, all those things, right? So that I think is one thing. I think there's definitely ways you can do it without an eQMS, whether that's like a hybrid Dropbox, Google Drive solution. We typically let our clients use our DocuSign, which is Part 11 compliant, right? So making sure your signatures, Adobe has it too, are Part 11 compliant. That's the main thing. But obviously eQMS gives you a platform to do design, do risk, do CAPAs and complaints and all this stuff in a module that's already set up for what you're doing. So it really prevents you from making mistakes, skipping an investigation or not doing a design review, those types of things. So it is really making sure that you're doing the right work. It's got the framework in place, which is the advantage. If you have the budget, I would recommend doing an eQMS, but just making sure you have external team or somebody internal that's going to be doing and running that eQMS.
Yeah, for sure. No, you made a good point though. Like I call it paper-based colloquially, right? A lot of people call it paper-based, but it's not paper-based. It's a hybrid, right? It is, it's just not a digital platform dedicated to that, right? You're still doing DocuSign and all of those things.
I have to specify because I was in the industry when it was all paper. So I was actually moving folders around to people's desks, like, please sign this, and having to go do that in person, right? So the paper-based file cabinets, hauling off all the records to the external storage. I remember all that vividly.
God, that's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. It's almost like, it reminds me of like QuickBooks, right? It's like, you could do all your accounting and your record keeping and all that stuff, but like, and just because you buy QuickBooks doesn't mean you just give your accountant the login and you're good to go with your taxes.
Yeah, here's my QuickBooks. Yeah, I can do great.
That's
we use that all the time. So eQMS is the QuickBooks. We're the accountant that goes in, does all the work, make sure your audit ready, make sure your reports are ready for the FDA, IRS, right?
Absolutely.
So that's our role. Exactly.
Yeah. You guys have been growing. You guys have been killing it. There's got to be some secret sauce that you guys have, or kind of some specific strategy that you lean on to have success for and with early stage companies. So if you could just give us a peek under the hood, how do you, what do you think Rook's secret sauce is, and how have you guys been so successful?
I think, it's kind of aligned. Our main focus, and I talked about that a little bit, is really trying to make the quality system as efficient as possible, really. And so that aligns with startups, right? You have limited bandwidth, limited team, limited funds. We have to make sure that we're doing everything we can as efficiently as possible. And the reason I started Rook is I had met a lot of companies that had a regulatory consultant that had given them a giant eQMS that they probably borrowed from Medtronic or another giant company, and it was not the right size for a startup, right? And it's not the right size for 5-person company. So my approach early on was to look at the standards and then align all the templates we created to how do we make this efficient. It has to be compliant, but there's things we can skip or not do that aren't required that these big companies choose to do, but they don't necessarily make the most sense for small and startup companies. So I think that kind of mindset has been key for everything we do. So all the quality, all the regulatory, we take, let's make it compliant. It doesn't have to be all the frills, but it is compliant with the FDA and it's efficient. And then we can add on things if needed for risk, things like that of the product. And the other thing I think that makes us really startup friendly is that we're able to scale up and down as needed, right? The timing for startups is always crazy, right? So we can move slow for development for 4 years, then we have a breakthrough and we get funding, so we're now ready to go as fast as we can, right? So we have companies we've met 2 years ago and hadn't talked to them at all, and they email us, say, hey, we're ready to go. Can you guys get started next week? And we're like, sure, we'll jump in and get going. So I think that's one thing that has helped with our startup relationship as well, is being able to scale up and scale down very quickly.
Yeah, I think you guys have been like very adaptability almost, right? Like adapting to meet the startups where they are, adaptability, flexibility, also like kind of, adapting to different mediums. Like you guys do a great job of content, and putting out stuff that's like, interesting, compelling around quality. So I think to me, that was like from the outside in looking, right? Like that's something that I've always noticed that you guys have been doing.
Yeah, I think that's, this stuff is hard. I think there's a lot of knowledge that we have internally. So just even if we're giving more knowledge in our podcasts or webinars, whatever, they're still going to get to a point where they most likely need some support. If they don't and they took our content and ran with it, that's great. But I think just putting out more information in the industry, because it is, that's part of the goal of XO as well, right? There's a lot of stuff that you don't know, and it's really hard to learn along the way. And so let's share as much as we can as far as, how it's been successful for our clients and other companies going forward.
Yeah. And speaking of success for clients and other companies, the thing almost everybody is driving at is getting their company acquired, getting that big exit, and being able to, if not go sit on a beach for a long time, at least visit a beach for a long time and sip a pina colada. So talk to me about how you've seen personally with companies you've worked with, or just in the industry, times where you've seen quality play a large role in exits, in acquisitions of larger companies.
Yeah, and no, we have helped with this directly with multiple clients where, you have your FDA and your ISO audits, and they go through things, and they have an audit plan, and they look at certain things. When you're going through a diligence audit or a partnership audit, or potentially even an audit to work in a clinical trial with a big player in the industry, they're going to do a deeper dive than the FDA or ISO ever would, right? So they're going to be looking for ways to reduce how much they're going to pay you, pretty much, right? So they're looking both for the risk on their side as well as the valuation side to say what is not here, what's a gap, what risks have not been addressed, what risks around the kind of post-market side, any complaints, adverse events, recalls, all of those things. And they are experts in this, right? They have whole teams that have been doing this for a long time, both on the quality side and the acquisition side. So it's going to be a deep dive. And they've also paid for it if they didn't do it, right? So we've also heard the stories of the acquiring company realizing they didn't have DHFs, they didn't have validations or process controls for manufacturing or supplier controls. And then they realize, oh, we just acquired this company, now we have to spend another year and a half, 2 years cleaning up all this stuff because we didn't do a good job. So I think the majority of these acquisition companies are now much savvier and much more intense with the information they're doing, the audits, the knowledge around what's required. And it's also, things you might not think about, right? Because they're looking to take your product international, right? So you might be US now, but they also want to see, do you have a plan to go into Europe? How quickly can we do that? How quickly does your product meet other specifications and requirements around the world? So I think that is also something to consider, is testing initially for international, even though it might not be part of your plan. If you do get acquired, that's going to be one of the key things they can do to increase the scope of your product.
Yeah, perfect example of that. If you're looking at doing a cleaning and rinsing validation for a set of instruments, right? The EU, right, wants you to have a automated cleaning, validation, right? So they can put it into a quasi dishwasher, right? And do that pre-cleaning prior to putting it in the autoclave, but that is not required, right, in the US. And a lot of companies don't do it in the US because it's not required. But I totally agree, especially I can imagine with a lot of the software enabled elements, doing that testing, that's specific to getting your CE mark right on the front end saves you just a ton of headache, right? Versus doing it later.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at some of these quotes, it's another $10,000, $15,000 to do it up front. And you're like, but then, down the road, it's going to be beneficial to go ahead and plan for it. So
yeah, there is honestly, Kyle, there's about 4 or 5 other topics that you're going to have to come back on the pod, because I want to talk to you about AI and how that's not only being integrated, but how the FDA and how quality people are thinking about auditing machine learning, adaptive systems, just a number of other things I want to talk to you about. But dude, thank you for coming on the pod. Thank you for your support of XO. We will put Kyle and Rook's information in the show notes below. But Kyle, before we go, is there anything you want to plug, anything that you want to promote here at the end of the pod?
Yeah, I mean, I think just Rook itself. We got a lot of content on our website. We're always pushing out new webinars, new blog posts, doing a lot of stuff, like I said, in the software AI space, also doing some cybersecurity stuff. So we cover a lot of types of devices. There's typically some device that's similar to what you're working on that we've had experience with. So definitely reach out on the website, content, all that stuff.
Awesome. Kyle, thank you again for being on the podcast. This was super fun. And to all listeners, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.